everybody, and welcome to our Women in Leadership Roundtable, hosted by the Shared Value Africa Initiative. We are in what the Shared Value Africa Initiative has termed International Women's Week, because as you would all know, we had International Women's Day on Monday. My name is Tabby Tsangiwe. I am the General Manager for Public Affairs and Communications at Old Mutual, and my job is to facilitate this very, very influential and significant roundtable. But before I go any further, I would now like to invite Vuyo Lutseke, who is the Director and Head of Stakeholder Relations at Shared Value Africa Initiative, to set the scene for us. Over to you, Vuyo.
Thank you so much, Tabby, and thank you so much also for just taking the time to lead today's discussion and to moderate today's discussion. So I'm honored to be here today on behalf of the Shared Value Africa Initiative, which is a Pan-African organization with a purpose to building Africa's most impactful shared value business network. We advocate and lobby for all business in Africa to create shared value by aligning their profit with creating positive social and environmental impact in society. This is profit to purpose, and by aligning with the SDG framework for greater impact. We work on a membership basis, but also form strategic partnerships to influence business to look at their sustainability through leading with purpose, creating shared value. In June 2020, the SVAI launched the hashtag It's Not Okay movement, a movement that aims to create awareness and action to reduce gender-based violence and femicide and to increase gender equality and parity in the workplace. As we drive shared value and purpose across Africa, issues that affect business and society simultaneously do come to the fore. Gender parity is one such issue that, while it's not new, was highlighted at the start of global pandemic in 2020, when the world went into lockdown and women faced victimization on a continuous basis while at home. Lack of gender parity needs to be addressed in all sectors of society, but it is particularly important from the private sector perspective, as empowering women in the workplace will have long-reaching effects into other aspects of their lives. I'm sure I don't need to convince you here today that there is a lack of transformation and representation of women in leadership positions. This affects decisions made at strategic and policy level, which may be skewed towards a more privileged male perspective. But of course, gender parity intersects with gender-based violence, of course, which is a scourge in our society. An organization that is committed to ensuring gender parity throughout its structures and value chain, ensuring an equally empowered workforce, is also able to tackle GBVF. Even more so when an organization purposefully addresses victimization not only in the workplace, but in society at large by using its influence and its reach. In 2020, through the It's Not Okay movement, the Shared Value Africa Initiative curated various engagement platforms, campaigns, and partnerships in order to conscientize and challenge our society to fight GBVF. It is particularly important to focus on businesses' potential impact as a collective to actively find solutions in the workplace. We now have an opportunity to continue to reflect on the inhibitors that need to be overcome to fast track this fight and also fast track gender parity. From policies to advocacy and of course action, the discussions we continue to have need to highlight the need for us to all stop being bystanders as individuals and organizations, and for men in particular to also take a stand and hold each other accountable. When we look at creating sustainable organizations and sustainable communities, we cannot do so without addressing issues of gender. Otherwise, we are just paying lip service and ticking boxes. We are here today to commemorate International Women's Week by bringing together this group of women leaders in business and civil society to further discuss gender equity. How in 2021, while we discuss this long-standing issue, what can be done by organizations and starting inside to drive equality in the workplace. From our roundtable members' perspective and vast experiences, we would want to hear what can be done to help more women have access and be empowered to get their seat at the table too. We cannot solve everything today, but we want to reflect on challenges and opportunities for economic growth if and when gender parity is achieved. We are also encouraged by those who recognize that no matter who or where they are, there's always something that can be done. One such example is a young independent filmmaker from Alexander, Angel Unita, who is developing a series that speaks to issues of gender-based violence and is currently looking for partners to help her drive this mission forward. We look forward to hosting more such discussions like today on a regular basis as we progress towards solutions for the private sector, civil society, and society at large. We thank you all, our attendees today as well, for coming and joining us, and look forward to hearing from you either via the chat box or the Q&A function, as this is a platform for you to also participate in and engage with us on. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm quite excited for today's discussion, and back to you, Tabby.
Thank you very much, Vuyo. That certainly does get us started on how we interact and how we engage. And really, today's roundtable is about engagement. So I would also like to encourage our participants to also follow our social media hashtags. The one is hashtag it's not okay _Africa. And the other one is value. Okay, I think I'll have to read that again. But for now, if you can please just follow us on the hashtag it's not okay Africa. It's not okay _Africa. So what I will do now is I will go straight into the roundtable discussion. We have a number of guests who have given us their time to come and participate in this discussion. And before they get started, I would like us to play a video, and then I will introduce each of those speakers. Our theme for the roundtable today is about achieving equality in the workplace. Certainly an ongoing topic amongst women generally, and one that we strive to achieve, hopefully, on this continent in our lifetime. I was listening to some stats that were being shared earlier on this week, and one of the things that I heard was that equality on the African continent for women is not likely to be achieved in the next 134 years. Our own Dr. Phumzile Mlambo Ngcuka was quoted as saying at the UN. We have amongst us Sibongile Ndashe. Sibongile is the founder and executive director of the Initiative for Strategic Litigation Africa. It's abbreviated as ISLA. She is a feminist who has worked as a public interest lawyer for the past 20 years. Sibongile, I think I would also like to just hear some of your thoughts around in the 20 years that you have certainly been on the continent. What is your view around whether or not we are likely to achieve this equality in the workplace anytime soon? Hopefully, definitely in our lifetime. We also have amongst us Mpho Litoko. Mpho is currently the GM for communications at SAPI. In her role, she provides strategic and operational leadership as SAPI's communication stakeholder and relations person, as well as their social responsibility and related efforts. Again, one that is sitting at a very influential place in terms of corporate and where she serves. And I think I would like to just start off by you, Sibongile, with some of your initial thoughts, and then hand over to you, Mpho, to give us some of your initial thoughts before I introduce the rest of our roundtable participants. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Tabby. I think it's hard to talk about a problem where so many people are invested in denying its existence. Some people believe that we have gender equality and that the feminists have won because we now see women in position of power and as leaders of organization, as most of us are. And so the argument is that the people who are talking about inequality are merely incompetent or making excuses for their failure to advance. And I think it is important to frame this conversation as such, because then when we understand the extent of this denialism and understand how over years it continues to be a stumbling block, because you cannot solve the problem, that does not exist. And so my intervention, I think today, it's really about the importance of understanding the framings or the frameworks that feminists have used in order to be able to help us surface how inequality really impacts on women in the workplace. So I'm just going to use 3 examples in order to challenge us to think about the current manifestations of the problem by looking at it. It's been 4 decades since Catherine McKinnon helped us to understand that sexual harassment was a form of workplace discrimination. And I think this was a very huge milestone, because it was really helping us to understand that women are not able to engage as men because they are sexually harassed in the workplace, and that this the consequence of this behavior was ultimately discrimination. And this has helped us to have all of these laws and policies to combat sexual harassment. But it was a lot of intellectual investment in that work to research how women actually were disadvantaged by sexual harassment in the workplace. Fast track to 15 years ago, Tarana Brooke started the Me Too movement to empower women through empathy and solidarity by telling us, demonstrating how many women have survived sexual assault and harassment in the workplace. And now we know that documents that initially appeared innocent, like non-disclosure agreements, documents that we saw as something that was important to end a relationship or to resolve a dispute, were actually tools to facilitate sexual harassment that stopped women from speaking out and enabled perpetrators to continue their behavior, because that has not happened. So finally, Me Too movement may have been a success in the global north, but it was not a success on its own. It had an operational arm, which was the Time's Up Fund, that provided legal and financial resources that emboldened women to speak because they would be protected. Me Too in Africa doesn't have Time's Up. So women are speaking, but perpetrators know that their time is not up, because now they are coming after women who are speaking out about this sexual harassment in the workplace, and non-disclosure agreements are still enforced on the continent. So I do think that when we understand how far we have come and where we are, that maybe, that's gonna enable us to have this kind of conversation, in this way today. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Sibongile. You will all excuse me if sometimes I'm in the light and sometimes in the dark. We are all experiencing a bit of a challenge with the load shedding that is happening countrywide. So I know that some of our ladies may also experience technical glitches here and there, but we will endeavor to make sure that we stay as connected as we possibly can. Mpho, over to you for some of your thoughts.
Thank you, Tebi. I'm just going to pick up on, some of what Lolo has also, sorry, not Lolo, Sibongile mentioned a bit earlier. If we think about the Beijing Declaration, Sibongile, that was also signed in 1995. And today we see that very little has happened in terms of accelerating women in leadership and equal positions in the workplace. And so you have to ask yourself, well, what is this challenge, and why have we not seen enough acceleration in terms of gender parity, especially in the workplace? For me, it really is about equal rights. It's about equal opportunities, equal responsibilities. And in the workplace, we have to realize and hold companies accountable, because it's not an option. There's enough research that has gone into showcasing that having women in equal positions in the workplace actually has financial benefits. And so shareholders in themselves need to start holding companies accountable. If the company's purpose really is to look after the shareholders' interests, we need to see more of those shareholders holding companies accountable where they do not see women in senior positions, because essentially that means that that company, from a financial perspective, perhaps has not reached its full potential because a woman was not in that room. And another thing for me that I just want to highlight, that women should not be the only ones discussing gender parity in the workplace. It's actually something that is of concern to both women and men. And so in addressing this, we need to ensure that we have all genders in the room and are addressing this and shifting that perspective, that it is not an option. It is a human right. And companies need to be held more accountable because it does have a financial impact. Thank you, Tabby.
Thank you very much for that, Mpho. Next on the panel, I'm going to introduce the next two ladies. We have with us, her name is Khanyisile Chaba, but I will not take advantage of this platform and be disrespectful to her, because I always call her Sis K. So Sis K is the head of responsible business at Old Mutual, a position that she has led for quite a number of years. But amongst other things that you may not know about her, she is a person who is into extreme sports, shall I call it. She climbs mountains, she runs marathons, and I'm sure that there's more that she will share about that as she highlights her own career. And we also have Santina Benson, and Santina is joining us all the way from Tanzania. Santina is an executive director based in Tanzania, and she brings together 150 CEOs of leading companies in Tanzania and provides a platform for regular engagement with governments and stakeholders for the country's sustainable economic development. So, Kay, I'll hand over to you to share some of your own thoughts about equality in the workplace, certainly, and maybe even on the running track, who knows? And then you will be followed by Santina. Thank you.
Thank you so much for the intro, and good morning, ladies who are on the panel and everybody. What a wonderful opportunity to be free, to be a woman, and to be able to challenge. When we watched the video earlier, it was talking about choose to challenge. So I talk about being free to have a platform like what Shared Value has created for us to can express and also to exchange what are some of the key issues that we can do together as women? For me, I think, Tebi, when you put my life and experiences, I look at myself as an adventurer, but to be an adventurer, to climb and summit a mountain, whether it's Kilimanjaro or Elbrus or Everest for that matter, is how you put yourself there first. What are the steps that you actually put in front of you, and how do we show up? So in the video that we shared, it was about choose to challenge and raise your hand. And I think what we're doing today, we are choosing to challenge and we are raising our hand. 4 key things for me and the organization that we are representing, you and I, Old Mutual, in terms of gender equality. Are we creating a space and an environment for women to thrive, to feel safe, and yes, to lift the barriers that are actually preventing women to succeed? Number 2, we may only focus on women internally, but what about small women businesses? What about women externally who are looking for opportunities that only organizations such as ourselves can actually create? So that supply chain, who are we looking at? When you look for opportunities to advance small businesses, who comes first in terms of who's got the bigger voice, who's got the experience, but who is more deserving? And we're not saying women should be done a favor, because across the continent we've seen this continent is advancing in terms of the economy at the back of the hard work and the sweat and tears of women. And then number 3 for me, it's about women have got unique needs that they require. So I always shy away and I always challenge when we have conversation where it's always, what about the boy child? What about men? No, this can't just be about women only. Equality is about putting both men and women together. There are those unique challenges, needs, and issues that can only pertain to women just because we are. So when we own up to being women with our own needs and not trying to challenge to an extent that we want to be equal or be seen in the same manner, I have my own needs. So what are we doing as an organization to create a space where we can respond in the manner that says, we see you as a woman? That for me is equality. And then the last issue, just number 4, there's these unconscious biases. When organizations put up their performance metrics, the potential to promote their employees, and they only solely look at the normal standard way, technical, high performance, I normally ask a question. People can be high performers based on where they come from, the advantages that they have, the step at which they had started. When you start a marathon, we're not all equal in the starting line because there are those who are in front already. A race like Congress Marathon, we've got over 20,000 people participating. So you might be like 2 meters away from the start. So most women, we find ourselves in the workspace having to start far before the starting line. So when we choose high performance and to promote and to reward, we need to put into consideration where is the starting line. And for me, if we can recognize that we're not starting at the same base, that is when we'll begin to address the issues of equality. Thank you.
You can go ahead, Santina. We see you and we're listening to you.
Great, thank you. Thank you so much, Tabi. Thank you again for this opportunity, and good morning to everyone on this very distinguished platform. I think maybe before I proceed into some of the challenges we're facing, I'd like to give a little bit of context in terms of the female leadership representation here in Tanzania locally. There's been a number of surveys that have been recently run, one by one of the leading newspapers here in Tanzania, and it showed that only 9% of women hold CEO positions here in Tanzania. As Tabi mentioned earlier, I represent an organization that has 150 CEOs. Of those 150, 19 are female CEOs. And of those 19, about half of them are entrepreneurs, so running their own organizations. So about 9 or 10 CEOs really out of 150 are running multinational corporations. So just to give you a little bit of context there. Just really like to add on to some of the issues and challenges highlighted by my former fellow panelists. I think within the African continent, women face very unique challenges. You know, we heard quite a devastating number that I think 124 years before women will reach gender equality here in the African continent. And I think that's due to many different factors. So in terms of women in the workplace, we see that they don't necessarily have the same access to opportunities. And I want to challenge us, what does equal opportunity actually mean? Are we, and just again referencing my former panelists, is are we starting from a level playing field? And we're absolutely not. Women have many different hats that they wear, especially here within the African continent, because we are leading in the home. And these are some of the issues that we don't see being brought to the table and discussed. How do we openly encourage these very frank conversations to take place, especially in environments where men are leading that space? How do we bring some of these issues? And I think a lot of us here on this call have a huge role to play in terms of digging deeper and actually addressing what those challenges are. Just as a quick example, what we've heard, we've been talking about this as an organization for a number of years now, quite intensely for 3 years, working with different organizations to try and really try to understand what are the challenges. And women say many different things. One is that when 5 o'clock hits, or 6 o'clock, or 7 o'clock, depending which organization you're working with, they're dashing home because they're leading the home. They have, many of them have children, and they have to manage that after work. Oftentimes, men then go off into networking opportunities, whereby sometimes deals are made. Again, when it's time for looking at evaluations, say, okay, X person closed out this many deals and so didn't. But are we digging deep to find out why that individual, that female, was challenged by that? So really trying to understand what the discrepancies are. Another very important example is women finding a voice. You know, there's been a very important example given when there's an opportunity for development within an organization. Let's say there's 10 key KPIs that you must meet. A man will look at them and say, oh, I have 5 of them, I'll go for that role. A woman will say, I have 7, let me wait until I reach 10, and therefore not necessarily go for that role. So how do we, as women empowering other women, really encourage women who may not necessarily have a voice, may not necessarily have access to coaches, mentors, sponsors, to really drive that home and say, you need to put yourself forward. Those are some of the other challenges that we have. But I think also bringing men to the discussion. You know, we find that there are quite a few male leaders who are trying to change the gender equality gap within their own organizations, but may not necessarily have a deeper understanding of what's really required. Again, we're not working from a level playing field. As women, we have very unique challenges, and therefore we really need to bring those to the forefront and make sure that the men understand that when you are evaluating 2 individuals, if the woman may be slightly askew in terms of performance, let's find out why. And then the point is really bringing on CEOs and development partners into the discussion as well. We see a lot of push in terms of challenges for the private sector. What we know is that the private sector is driven by profit. And as much as we are starting to move into this world where we want sustainability to be in the forefront, we need to start having these discussions where those who are leading see an improvement in terms of profitability. Apologies, I see my network is challenged, so I'll just turn off my video. And just my final point would be that show where it makes business sense to bring women to the table. What we see within the private sector is that a lot of private sector leaders will continue to be driven by financial performance. So until we start demonstrating clearly how female in leadership positions make business sense, we will continue to struggle and we will reach this 124 years. How do we challenge these 124 years and cut that by half or potentially even more? So I think I'll pause there. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Santina. As we said, the network will remain being an issue. Our final panelist is Irene Charnley. Irene is the president of International Women's Forum South Africa, but she is also the founder and deputy chairman of Smile Telecoms. It's a Pan-African telecommunications group, which was established in 2007 with broadband operations in Nigeria, Tanzania, Uganda, and presence in the Democratic Republic of the Congo. Irene, thank you very much for joining us. I know that amongst the many hats you wear, and I must say, I'm having such a moment right now, a groupie moment, because you're someone that I so admire, and I'm really, really interested to hear, because amongst the many hats you wear, you also are participating in what is known in South Africa as the GBVF Private Sector Fund. And this fund was launched by our own state president a few months ago. I think it was in January or February, where basically a lot of corporates came in and they participated. And there was a lot of pledges that were made by many corporates and many public sector partners in South Africa around supporting this initiative. I would really like to hear more about how is it going? How can private sector participate? Because I'm certain there are many private sector participants in today's roundtable who would need to hear more about it. And maybe if you can tell us more about what is the aim of that private sector support fund that has been led by the state president.
Yes, thank you so much, Tabi. And it is a privilege for me to be here, and great meeting all the beautiful ladies, you know, across the continent. I see we also have representatives from outside of South Africa, out of Africa. So it's really a privilege for me to be here. And thank you, Tiki, for inviting me as part of this roundtable. So just maybe as background for people who might not be aware. So the IWF is actually the International Women's Forum, which is a South African chapter of IWF Global, which is an organization that consists of about 7,000 women leaders. It's across 36 nations and all 6 continents. So the IWFSA, in actual fact, just from a background point of view, met our president of the country and members of his cabinet about a year ago, where some key priority areas and challenges facing the country were tabled. So at that dialogue, the IWFSA offered our commitment and support to the presidency, where we've offered any assistance that might be required to, amongst others, inspire the support of the different components of the government's National Strategic Plan on Gender-Based Violence and Femicide, which abbreviated as the NSP on GBVF. So that was its government and civil society's work, and I think Sibongile and team were all party to the establishment and the development of the NSP. So we as IWF led, in partnership with government and other groupings, the establishment of a private sector gender-based violence and femicide, which we call the GBVF Response Fund 1. And that was very, very important for us because private sector has a very important role to play in GBVF, the eradication of GBVF, because as we all know, it does affect private sector in terms of productivity and everything, because at the workplace, because women are central in that. So but what we found is that when the launch took place, and it took place on the 7th of February, which is just over about a month ago, it did take place under, unprecedented times, and we always say there are two pandemics. The current pandemic, is obviously the corona virus. And then the second pandemic that we are faced as women is the GBVF pandemic. So what has happened? So the fund was established, and the way we went about, initially we assembled critical partners from the most reputable private sector companies, and all of them contributing their resources on a pro bono basis, at least for 1 year. So we got in the top legal firm, ENS, one of the top banks to lead the corporate banking. We groups like, in terms of administrators, one of the top fund administrators, Alexander Forbes. We got a top auditing firm to do for the accounting services, and another top firm, auditing firm like Deloitte, to do the auditing, and PwC in terms of the accounting. So all of them, because they felt the importance also that they need to be part of the process, and they themselves as private sector companies have a role to play in that. So also the initial trustee, the board was established, and the board is led currently by a very GBVF activist, the vice chancellor, the chancellor of Wits University, and a businesswoman in her own right. She's the chair of the fund, Dr. Judith Lamini. The deputy chair is Wendy Lucas Bull, is the chairman of a bank, and the chair of Absa Bank, and the chairman of a huge retail group. And other members includes, activists like Faith Kanile, and a businesswoman, Dr. Namani Machau, Trifosa Romano. So very, very important people. But now what's happening with the fund is that the part of trying to staff the fund with other board members, the whole process, the fund has started the process now of calling suitable candidates with very strong credentials in, grassroots organizations and people with experience in forming similar type of organizations, people who come from civil organizations, trade unions, and the private sector. So it's to staff the board with more non-executive directors. And the objective is so that we can ensure, the fund can ensure a unbiased guidance, and where the fund could be steered into the right direction in line with its mandate. So maybe just to conclude in terms of the objectives of the fund, part of it is to support measures to eradicate, all measures to eradicate GBVF as articulated, as I said earlier, on the National Strategic Plan on GBVF. The objective is to make resources accessible with priority given to grassroots organizations and NGOs, and to provide, amongst others, a channel for the private sector to make wider contributions towards tackling the GBVF scourge. So on the day of the launch, the fund was launched with and kickstarted with about 138 million rand. So it's just under $10 million, 100 million in cash, and another 38 million in terms of earmark for specific programs geared in terms of the NSP. So the way we are moving forward now, the whole campaign, once the board is fully staffed with representatives from civil society and other private sector companies, the objective is that within the next 6 months, at least, the fund will be announcing what they have done specifically and where the interventions have been made. So we all look very forward to what needs to happen with regard to that. So just some of an introduction, and anybody in the private sector who can contribute, individuals who can contribute, the fund, the proper full governance structures are in place, and we encourage everybody because we want to raise at least 1.5 billion rand, at least $100 million for the fund over the next 2 years. Thank you, Tabi.
Thank you so much, Irene. Definitely some ambitious goals to get the fund started, but certainly good work that is actually going to be done with that fund, I'm sure. I am going to ask all my panelists if they can turn on their cameras now, because there are a number of comments that we have been receiving. Thank you very much to everybody who is engaging with us. And also just to remind you that you can certainly put any questions that you would like to pose to the panelists in that Q&A button. And I think maybe I will start with the very first question, which can be answered, I think, by all of you, which says, from your roles, are you seeing any potential for change? Why does it feel like we talk continuously, but there is no change? Can I ask Sibongile to go first with a view on that, and then we'll just follow with anyone else who'd like to add or build?
Definitely. There is change, and I think maybe sometimes we don't take stock of it. We don't celebrate a lot because it looks like we are just so bombarded, I think, about the bad things that are happening that we actually don't do that. So if you look, initially I made an example of the Me Too movement. The idea that there are people who were untouchable, you know, the idea that there were industries and there were sectors. So in the corporate sector, you will know about this, as it happens sometimes in civil society, the person whose projects are so exciting that we are able to get money, you know, from them. The ones, you know, the golden boy of the organization, or the people who are able to do all of these big contracts in corporate sector, how they have historically, you know, been protected, you know. So anyone who made a complaint, sexual harassment about them, it was not possible, you know, to have anything done. But through the power of Me Too movement, I think the documentary is called Untouchable. When you look at actually how over decades, people like Harvey Weinstein were actually able to move from one victim to the other, knowing that they were not only protected by their organizations, but they were protected by the entire industry that saw them as people. This is not something that only happened in the US, it's also something that happened in the UK, where they had to set up an entire unit that investigates historical crimes. So all of these people who were untouchable. So what this actually tells us, it's that we have now people who have set up websites, social media accounts to begin naming people, that what we need to do is to begin to close those gaps and to say what is the financial and legal resource that the people need in order to be able to speak out, because we understand that it is the silence, you know, that has enabled people to be able to do that. So initially, when I was talking about how do we begin to frame this, that we have to be able to understand these frameworks to say, this was the problem, the protection, the complicity of the organizations or the institutions. And so when we have things like whistleblowing that allow people to see that, and over the past number of years, ever since we had laws that spoke against sexual harassment, we have seen women who go to court and who are sometimes successful, you know. And what has made that possible? It's this understanding that you don't have to deal with sexual harassment as an normal kind of workplace discipline problem. It's to say this has moved to a discrimination framework. Like when you do this, you have discriminated against someone and there is a positive obligation on the employer to do something about it. So I think it is important to see all of these things that may look like they're not making any change, and then to be able to celebrate all of this, because I feel we may not feel so exhausted and so disempowered all the time that nothing changes, because there are things that are changing.
Thank you so much, Sibongile. Are there any further thoughts or any builds from any of the panelists, or shall I go to the next questions?
Debbie, if I can come in, Swangile is correct that things are changing, albeit very slowly. And I think for us in our organization, seeing women such as yourself as an example, Terry, by the way, congratulations, GM, Corporate Affairs, major situation that you find the organization moving towards giving those positions to women who can change the landscape. I'm the head of responsible business. At the core of what we do as an organization, we put those principles of what does it mean to be conscious, particularly when it comes to human rights, gender issues as well. So it's about how we create a space that comes from a leadership that takes from what we say about things, but to actually practice. It's about changing our language and changing our speech. Because to the point, to the question, it can't just be about speeches at big platforms. But in my own background, how am I leading at Old Mutual to change the landscape so that Old Mutual is our muscle? We can influence the broader society. And we are part of the program and the movement that Sis Irene was talking about. We are showing up in the manner that says we are responding, we are hearing you, but we are not sitting outside. It will only change when we change our own speech by making sure that we put into practice what we think needs to change.
Thank you. There's also a question about women supporting women. We often side with rumors rather than support our sisters. We side with our male counterparts and women pay the price. How can we get women to unite? I suppose this speaks to, when women are in influential positions of leadership, how do we support our own sisters more is the question. Santina, I don't know what the experience is like in Tanzania when you interact with a number of CEOs in your organization and you provide this platform for them. How do you find the support that is given for women who do come forward with issues that they face, and how are they supported generally?
Thank you, Tabby. I think it's a big challenge because if you remember the statistics that I shared, with only 9% of women being CEOs, you can imagine how would those 9 women serve as, whether it's a role model, a mentor, coach, very important in addressing some of the challenges that women face. So it is a challenge because that 9% now needs to sit in leadership positions, needs to sit on these boards to be able to even advance that just conversation at this point. So I think it's putting a lot on that 9%, and I all the way because they're women managers who have women working below them, etc. So it needs to be a value chain. It cannot just sit on the shoulders of that 9% here specifically in Tanzania. But that 9% have a very specific role to be able to influence those who they're mentoring, etc., to continue to do the same. There is a huge gap because almost a fear of being a lone voice, definitely. So we definitely need more women coming to the table. But one point that I'd like to share, just speaking to the previous point, and I think it's really important, is that we are advancing, right? So even if we look at this 9%, I remember we did this about 3 years ago, it was about 7.5%. It still seems low, but the truth is that we are advancing. There's a lot of leaders in private sector who are doing specific initiatives, driving specific initiatives to increase gender parity within the workplace. We're seeing here in Tanzania some of the big banks doing so much in the space. What's missing is the voice being given to those leaders to really understand and to challenge their fellow leaders in view. Once those challenges are a huge difference. And I think, again, going back to my final point, which was, how do we openly discuss about some of these things that no one wants to talk about? In Tanzania, you go back to work after 3 months of having delivered a baby. Are you in the right mental frame of mind going back into that workspace? Are you going to be competitive with your colleague in terms of performance evaluations, etc., if half your mind is really at home? Who do we talk about? Some of these real challenges. We said we'll address them, but if we're not talking about them even here on this platform, we definitely won't get to a space where we're talking about them with our male counterparts. So we really need to dig deep and start really talking about some of these real challenges that women are facing. And I know many of us have as well. So how do we support those who are coming up and saying, don't worry, this is how we managed it, having these frank discussions. But just on a final point, Tabby, it's a gap. We need to continue to build that pipeline and fill that gap of female leaders. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Santina. And actually what you've just ended on right now leads right into the next question. And I'm sure, Mpho, maybe you can just breathe on this one, even from a SAPI perspective, because the question is, one way to fighting for gender equality is by making men part of the conversation. How do we do that? And actually, maybe it would be interesting to find out the stats. Even on this platform, we have 189 participants. It would be interesting to hear how many of those are men, because I know that one of the things Tiki does strive for is cross-gender participation and openness to this. And I would really love to hear your own opinion on that as well, Irene, as the president of IWFSA. How do we bring men into the conversations? Because surely it's not just about us as women having these conversations. Mpho?
Thank you, Tabby. You know, and as I mentioned earlier, gender parity really is an issue that needs to be addressed by both men and women. And to bring men into the conversation really is to try and showcase that men quite often feel a sense of the unknown, because having a woman quite often means that there's a shift or a change in that boardroom, and you know, an unsure space that they don't know how to navigate as well. So I've spoken to some of my male colleagues where I found myself as the only. There's this term that McKinsey has coined as the onlys, the only woman in the room. And having to navigate a space where you are not sidelined, where your voice is equal to others, and that your opinion actually is taken into consideration. And it's quite a challenge. Men are so comfortable being in each other's space that you find even when they need to appoint someone, they just go to the next one that looks like them. I think it's human nature. The more you automatically you know, associate with people that look like you, and it's the same with men. And I think we need to create spaces where, when we're talking about gender parity, even with men, it's not at, you know, creating a sense of fear, creating a competition that they are going to be out of a job or unsure about the future for them, but that it actually means how do we as human beings interact and ensure that in this diverse world, we are able to bring diversity in the room, so that when decision making takes place, we're hearing different voices, different perspectives, which is so necessary in this unstable environment that we operate in today.
Hi, Tabby. Maybe if I can just add, just in terms of, I think men is part and parcel of the solution. But the first issue is we as women needs to always be together. When in whichever position we are, wherever we are, when they talk about staff that needs to be employed, whether or boards that have to be appointed, or somebody that has to be mentored, the first that must come to mind is another woman. The first that has to come to mind is where if somebody say we can't find people, it is our job to say, well, you can't find people, we will find those people for you. We have to be vigilant about these things. And I mean, people like us, I always say, in fact, I would also encourage many women to go and get the book that was written, one of the, she's a chair of Anglo-American Corporation, but also the vice president of IWF, like Dancing in the Boardroom by Nolita Vakude. Get that book. Because, you know, at the time when we were the first people in the boardroom, you know, it must make us uncomfortable, because we always say we were the transformation agents. But even as we are sitting here, you know, change has been there, but the change has been very, very slow. Santina, you're mentioning about 9%. Do you know what's the number in South Africa in terms of the female CEOs on the JSE, Johannesburg Stock Exchange listed companies? 3.3% by a report published by PwC. I mean, board membership, I mean, somebody also posted earlier, it's about 29%. And this is, I'm talking listed companies, but in the public sector, they've been way ahead. You know, your state-owned entities, in terms of parliament, we're number 3 in Africa, number 10 in the world, you know. So we're way ahead. So there is a lot to be done. And I think everybody of us know that we have a problem. We all know the facts. We all have difficulty wherever we are. And it is so first of all, when we're at the workplace, a lot needs to be done. And just so from IWFSA, what we do, we are saying also at the moment, we have a what we call a mentorship program. So each of our members, they are all successful women leaders, and, you know, they've achieved within their field, for example. So every one member mentor 2 younger generation of women, because we have to develop the next layer of leadership. So when there are board positions available, we have to encourage people, you know, to apply for those people. And women that we know, you know, the people who are on this platform, let us mentor those women, give them advice, you know, because sometimes somebody would say, you know, I don't know, this is what happened, but we could be able to guide them and direct them. So just another point I wanted to say, it is now time for us, and I think in South Africa, whether it's Tanzania and other, Rwanda's way ahead of all of us. But one of the key things we have to do now in terms of ensuring that where do we intervene when it comes to changes? The first issue is legislation. So the voice of women, whether we are women in construction or in accounting or in IT or in telecoms or lawyers, it doesn't matter where we are. The first issue is our voices together is the legislation. You know, which type of legislation can we intervene with? The second one is shareholder activism. Most of the pension funds, I mean, if you look at South Africa, for example, pension funds, which are government-owned pension funds like the Public Investment Corporation, Eskom Pension Fund, Transnet Pension Fund, all the other pension funds. Where's the shareholder activism? You know, we need institutional activism, and we are the ones. We have our people there on the boards. We have the people on the subcommittees. We have to say, and we have to write to say, what are you doing about this? I mean, recently, we have a very competent person at the bank, African Bank, who leaves and nobody says anything. But when you look at the CEO himself comes from an environment, a male person who's also been battered in various organizations. But what are we doing in terms of saying why is nobody saying something about this? But it means that wherever we are as women, we need to ensure that that same woman gets somewhere else in a similar position to ensure that she's supported. I'm just raising these issues. There are a lot of discussion. We'll never be able to cover the issues, but in our lifetime, we have to bring change. We have to, and this change must not just be slow, it must be significant. So let's try and do that. We might, but we're laying the foundation for the future generations to come. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that, Irene. Sibongile, there is another question here for you, which is from your experiences, in the legal perspective. The question is, our justice system has a long road ahead to ensure accountability for perpetrators of GBVF. What can fast track this?
The breakdown in the justice delivery system is clearly something that most of us who have tried to engage or to support people who need assistance from the system know that it has worked. In fact, many people feel that it's a setup asking people to go to the justice delivery system because we end up talking about secondary victimization, which has often been said by other people who have experienced it to even be worse than the first incident of the violation, because this is where people go to or are told to go to a system or to a place where there is a possibility for recourse. And when that system actually fails them, people are just don't know what to do. So what do we need to do in order to be able to make the experience of engaging the criminal justice system kind of better for women so that it makes sense? Many times people have talked about what we need to do with the police. And I do think that the levels of impunity that we see in our countries comes from a place where the police know that nothing is going to happen to them. And so I do think that sometimes this conversation about why we need to train the police is a wrong emphasis. It's not because they don't know what needs to be done. It's because they do not care about the consequences. If you look at police training manuals, they have all the information that you can actually put in there. So it's people who know, but knowing very well that if they turn away a survivor, nothing is going to happen to them. So I do think that accountability is one of the things that we need to invest in. And so the National Strategic Plan, for example, puts accountability and leadership there in the first pillar to say that there is a pillar that deals with the reforms in the criminal justice system, but we need to be able to get accountability right. That when someone has a duty to do something and the person fails to do that, then that person has to be held accountable. So our question is, what is it that the state was supposed to do but they didn't do? Or what is it that they didn't do that they did? And so when we all, or most of us, have a shared understanding of what is this accountability, then we will be able to strengthen that kind of arm. The other thing that goes with this is really legal empowerment. If you look at the number of cases that have been at the Constitutional Court, people holding the state accountable for the failure to protect them against gender-based violence, most of them have been white women, right? And this is because of the legal advice that they have been able to get, in order to be able to get there. If you look at Black women, there have been few who have taken like affirmative cases to the Constitutional Court, the recent one being like last month's case. But when you look at Black women who have been there, they have been there not as people who are saying my right has been violated, but basically where a certain provision of the criminal justice legislation has been challenged. So the distinction that I'm trying to make here is that only when people are legally empowered to challenge the failures or to understand that what happened to me at the police station is not what's supposed to have happened, that I deserve better and deserve more, then people will be able to seek help. But we also need to understand this. Over the past decade, there has been a systemic dismantling of service provision organizations that are supposed to provide support services to survivors of violence. So when I started working maybe about 2 decades ago, there were organizations that were providing counseling for women, like court support services, you know, and understanding that it is very hard to be there and to be faced by all of that and to help victims navigate the criminal justice system. It is very hard to find organizations that do that. POA, for example, used to be able to do that. And a few years ago, they were not longer able to get money to do that. Twaranang was able to do that. These are just examples in Johannesburg. When you go everywhere outside of Johannesburg or Gauteng, all over the country, this has been something that has happened. We had services that were really thought out, that this is what you would need to put in place in order to support women. There were the Tutuzela care centers, which are the one-stop justice centers, that were supposed to link people with health services, prosecution services, police services. Most of them were not rolled out in the way that we had wanted them to be rolled out. And so many provinces still do not have them. And where they are barely functional. So what I am saying is we know what works, but the failure to invest in the services that makes the criminal justice system respond has been one of the failings of this moment.
Tabby,
thank you. Yeah, Mpho, go ahead.
If I can just also add to this, you know, I absolutely agree with what Sibongile raises there. It's a multidisciplinary approach that is required across the health sector, across the workplace, the media, education systems, and then the justice system as well. And I find quite often that programs that are dealing with gender-based violence are quite fragmented in their approach. And I think if we all come together in a coordinated manner across these various areas, you know, the response will be better coordinated and we'll actually see some real benefits to that. So I absolutely agree with Sibongile there.
Thank you. And I do want to say a shout out to Benson Bikyo, who is the only real man that has put in a comment to say, I'm here, I'm a real man, and he's joined us all the way from Kampala in Uganda. Hello, Benson. I think before we kind of go towards closing, I really would like to hear if there are any other thoughts from any of the panelists. There are a lot of comments, Ms. Kay, that were there around the point you made about organizations supporting women entrepreneurs. And one of the comments was actually one of the things that can certainly have a positive impact on society generally in South Africa is that support of women entrepreneurs and the small women-owned companies. And there is a comment which goes on to say that it could actually be one of the things that even leads to the reduction of gender-based violence and femicide in our country. And I do see your hand, Irene. I'm not concluding at all, so I would like you to come in and climb in and give us your views as well.
Okay, Debbie, that is actually true. What makes gender-based violence and femicide continue? What makes men act in the manner that they do? What makes organization not face the issue of gender inequality in our workplace? I think it stems from this space of first fear and control. I think somebody mentioned earlier is the inability of organizations to deal with women and their natural power. And if we can start one step back, that at the level where we are discussing this agenda, maybe it's a bit high. How do we start at a much more lower level in our education system as well? Paul, I like the point that you mentioned around the ecosystem. How is education changing today to create a space where both young girls and young boys do not fear each other. There is no need to start controlling from them. And then you take it one step even before we get anywhere at home. How do we raise our children? How do we socialize our children in terms of saying, you are a girl, you are a boy, and what is your role in your society? So there's a lot, as Sis Irene was saying, that we can do. There is so much in this stew, in this pot, but there's also an opportunity that so many interventions, as Wongile is mentioning, have been introduced over the years, but nothing has changed. Isn't this time to change the language and the basic simple things first, starting with how do we incorporate this within our education system? In our own space, we talk a lot about financial education as an example. And why I was touching a point around small businesses is because there is a gap. So yes, it is true that many women fear leaving because there is no plan. They don't know what's going to happen to their future. They don't know, because even when women have their own money and their own job situation, but there is no trust that if I leave this situation, I'm actually going to be okay. And that empowerment can start from the time when she is a little girl and she understands that she has enough power within her to propel herself, whether she meets the Prince Charming, who ends up being a prince abuser, to being in a point where she can make decisions on her own. Let's start with the new language, even ourselves as mothers. When we advise our children, you know, in my culture, when we get married, you get surrounded by women who have traveled the journey, but none of them tell you it might change. And none of them tell you when it changes, you have a right to leave. When do we start saying, it's actually okay for you to leave? And you can leave because you have made plans beforehand. This thing of perseverance in marriages, because everybody wants to see their child being married, we're killing our children. So when do we start changing that language ourselves? So that by the time we discuss at this level, we have not missed the gap, because it might be late by the time you address this at the corporate level, when at school level, the girl doesn't know that she has all the rights. At home, she doesn't know that she is actually equal or even more powerful than her brother. It's the role that we can play as mothers. Thank you.
Thanks, Kay, and welcome Gregory Nyonga as well, joining us as a man from the Northern Cape, as you lean in, Irene, with your thoughts as well.
No, thank you, Tabi. I fully agree with Kanisile. In fact, Kanisile, when you get married, the old people used to tell us, you know, when they give you advice, and it's only the woman, they will tell you how we must listen to the husband. And if he hits you, come back to us. And then when they hit you, you run to them. Instead of going there and beat him up and take your clothes, they tell you how you must go back, and eventually he kills you, you know. And that's so, at least when we start where we are, at least it's you're absolutely spot on. We have to do it is our role, and you know, even the whole education system, everything needs to start right there. And the stories, successful stories of women, the woman who's been writing books, there's Hasitsane, all of the people who's written beautiful books. Why is it not you know, in our schools? We don't learn about the women who have really brought about clear change, whether it's in the boardroom, whether it's in media, whether it's, we don't hear of that. But I just wanted to take the opportunity anyway, Kanisile and, you know, and I think Masarame, Tabi, and then, you know, Old Mutual, you're doing a great job. I mean, just by you, and I mean, it's women that are there in charge and using your budget. So just, you know, to fund discussions like this, and I think you should increase your budget so you can do a lot more as well. You know, so we must campaign so you get a bigger budget, you know, so that you can support these type of forums a lot more. But we thank you for that. The reason I raised my hand earlier, I just wanted to raise the fact that at the moment, you know, all of us know government have been saying that 40% of all their procurement is going to go to women-owned businesses or managed businesses. we need to make sure, wherever we are, that we ask the questions that, with whatever sector we are, to make sure that that spend is actual spend on women businesses. We have to do that. And I don't know how we are going to do that. And maybe that's something that could be funded, because how do we ensure and monitor to ensure that there are women-owned businesses, that if there's 30 billion or 100 billion rand that are being spent, that 40 billion of that are actual women-owned businesses. And all the budgets now, I mean, all the budgets, people have submitted budgets, their 3-year budget, this is their budget in the department, this is how much they spend on women business. Let us have a campaign to make sure that it actually is money spent on women businesses. I just wanted all the women entrepreneurs, let them go and find out which sector are you, which department do you fall under in terms of government, what are the tenders that are out, and let us start campaigning. And Sibongile, you are the legal fraternity. We'll get Old Mutual to sponsor them, and let's take up these companies if these companies didn't get the work done. I'm just being an activist today. Thank you.
Wow, thank you so much. I honestly think that time is the enemy of such excellent and good discussions and amazing engagement. We are seeing all of the comments that are being made in the comments box. We certainly encourage you to please post more on our hashtags. The hashtag that I had forgotten earlier is Shared Value Africa, by the way. That's what happens when you've got nerves at the beginning of hosting such an auspicious platform of such influential people. But now that I'm more relaxed, it suddenly just came to me. So I know that we would honestly continue for as long as we could on this platform, but time is against us. So right now, I would like to call on Tiki to come and do the closing remarks. But before she does, I really would like to thank each and every one of our panelists for your active participation. I would like to thank you for such engaging thoughts. I'm left with a whole lot of things now. I mean, I'm not a legal person by any stretch of the imagination, but I'm fascinated by what I've heard here, and I'll certainly be making my way to Tanzania soon and hopefully meet one of those 9% of the women CEOs that you have in that country, Satina. Thank you so very, very much for your time. Tiki is the person who really is extremely, extremely passionate about various topics that she brings onto this platform, the Shared Value Africa initiative. She is the founder of both and CEO of both the Shared Value Africa initiative as well as Shift Impact Africa. She is absolutely driven by her passion for the African continent and the shared value business management concept that reconnects companies' success to social progress. Tiki, it's been an honor to be here with these wonderful, wonderful ladies. It's been an amazing engagement and discussion. And now I'd like to hand over to you for closing remarks. Thank you.
Thank you, Tabby, and thank you for being such a magnificent moderator and facilitator. It's really been a great conversation. And listening to the rich conversation today made me feel both sad and positive about the future, because there's so much we can do together. And that's the hope I got out of the conversation today, because we need to empower each other. If we stand up for one woman, we stand up for all women. And what we have to remember is that gender-based violence continues because the world keeps silent. And there's no vaccine for gender-based violence. So we need to take action. And Irene, I'm the activist with you today, as you know from our conversations. I think we're both strong activists. So I want to share this quote with you from a Dr. Dennis Mukwege. He's the Congolese gynecologist that received a Nobel Peace Prize for his treatment of women who've been raped by armed rebels in the DRC. And he said, until women wake up and unite and speak up and say together, say no to rape, no to violence against women, no to child abuse, no to atrocities against women, only if they together say no Only then will men listen. So today, my message to all of us, we all need to rise to the challenge. We are the ones, every single one of us here today are the ones that can be the change. So I want to say thank you, Tabby, thank you, Vuyo, Sibongile, Mpo, Siskani, Irene, and Santina for making today's conversation possible. We, as the Shared Value Africa Initiative, is committed to continue to work with our members and our communities to influence and address gender equality. And in the words of the World Health Organization, we need to change harmful attitudes, improve access to opportunities and service for women and girls, and foster healthy and mutually respectful relationships. The SVAI, or the Shared Value Africa Initiative, plan to continue these conversations as we cannot keep silent. And we hope that through partners and funding, we can take these conversations into the rest of Africa and turn them into action. And I want to say again today, thanks for being here today, and God bless, and let's commit to never keep silent about gender-based violence, as it's not okay. I do want to close off by asking the technical team to play this video from UN Women, which really says it all. So Lolo, on that note, I want to thank you all for being here today, but please stay for another 2 minutes and watch the video because it really says it all. Thank you.
The 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development promises to make human rights real for everyone, everywhere. It has 17 goals and gender equality cuts across all of them. At a time when we're facing conflict, extremism, and environmental degradation, the SDGs focus on sustainability, equality, peace, and progress. The SDGs challenge deepening inequalities around the world by committing to leave no one behind.
The 2030 Agenda is very clear. There can be no sustainable development without gender equality.
In reality, however, gender inequalities are pervasive in every dimension of sustainable development.
Globally, women and girls are overrepresented among the extreme poor. 330 million women and girls live on less than $1.90 a day. That's 4.4 million more than men.
In nearly 2/3 of countries, women are more likely than men to report food insecurity.
Despite recent progress, access to quality education is still not universal. Globally, 15 million girls will never get a chance to read or write, compared to 10 million boys.
Climate change has a disproportionate impact on women and children. They are 14 times as likely as men to die during a disaster.
The majority of urban women are living in conditions where they lack access to clean water, improved sanitation facilities, durable housing, or sufficient living space.
In many areas, the current rate of progress is too slow to achieve the SDGs by 2030. To turn promises into action, we need to step it up now.
We need public action to tackle inequalities and discrimination.
We need to invest in policies and programs that work for women and girls.
We need more and better data to assess whether what we are doing for women and girls actually works.
And we need greater accountability at all levels for commitments made but not met.
Let's turn these promises into action.
And gender equality into a lived reality for all women and girls.
It's up to all of us
to ensure the journey is successful.